Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I just like to start by welcoming everybody to our quarterly training about the HUD export. I know this is the time of year where our agencies are starting to gather their information to report to HUD. So we just kind of want to go over a refresher of what this is going to look like using ProLinkHFA and kind of talk about any errors you might receive while you're going through the process of collecting your data and then submitting your data to HUD. We'll have Q&A. If you have a question, pop it in the chat. Um, and we'll get to that at the end. We're going to have a Q&A. We'll also have a 10-minute break in here at some point. And we will post a recording of the training if you want to share that with any of your internal folks. We'll have that posted and do a follow-up email after our training if you registered for this webinar. So thank you for joining, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Happy Wednesday. I am Sara Surprenant. I'm customer success rep trainer at ProLink Solutions. I've probably worked with some of you or you've attended some of my trainings. If you have attended my trainings, you know that I tend to talk really fast. So I'm going to try to slow down and enunciate. So we don't have to breeze through this webinar in 30 minutes and no one retains anything. This is what we're going to talk about today, and just kind of a guesstimate of how long it's going to take us to get through each item. We're going to do a quick overview of the utility, how to find your HUD data in ProLink HFA, what it takes to create the export, files and error resolution, and then we'll do our Q&A. So again, even though we're going to address some of the questions we get at the end of the webinar, you can go ahead and plug those into the chat. So they may be answered during the chat and we could just review them with other folks when we're done. So let's start with our overview. This is kind of our internal process as far as using our HUD export utility. And when I talk about the HUD export utility, I'm going to bring up our application really quick just to give you a visual, because some of you may think it's something, it may be your first time and you don't know. This is our application, and we have utilities over here. When you go into ProLink HFA, utilities, and then we have our HUD export utility. And this gives you the option to export those files. We're going to go over what all of this means during this webinar. So not only do you need to be able to find out where that lives, where the fields are collected, making sure your configuration settings are correct, which I believe 90% of the time, 95% of the time, most of you who have used our HUD export previously, you already have your config settings set up correctly, because you would know immediately if you didn't, and you would probably reach out to us and we would fix that. So that's, but just in case, we'd like to let you know. Where the HUD export utility is in ProLink HFA, which I just showed you, some of the required fields and what the export history function is and what that does, and actually creating your HUD data export files. So this is what's new compared to last year. We had some updates in ProLink HFA that addresses the resyndication and initial certification events for your tenant collection. And these items can be found in our help and release notes, which I believe most of you get an email reminder or an email notification from Procorum when those release notes are posted to HFA user group. If you are unaware of how to find those release notes, let us know. Let me know. Reach out to me. My email address is going to be on a slide at the end of the presentation, but I think most of you know how to find me anyway. And we'll make sure that you have access, or I'll send you a link so you can easily find those release notes when you need to. So this is a quick acronym list, and I realize most of us probably do know what these are, but just in case you don't, we're just a quick little acronym list of things that we're going to talk about today, so we're all literally on the same page with our acronyms. TCA is tax credit allocation. When I talk about TCA deals, I'm talking about the TCA tax credit allocation module in ProLink HFA. Your BEN is going to be your building identification number. Your place in service date is abbreviated as PISD throughout our slides, and occasionally I will refer to portfolio property as PP. So if you hear me say PP data update, which I probably will at some point, that is what I'm talking about, our portfolio property data update. So first of all, something we added a couple of years ago is when you're in your portfolio property, which in a perfect world, our agencies will have their TCA portion of the deal associated to the portfolio property way before we're doing any kind of HUD collection. And once you have your property out there, we do have AM characteristics, and it has this little checkbox on AM characteristics for your HUD LIHTC data collection. AM characteristics, for those of you familiar with our asset management module, AM does stand for asset management. See, there's an acronym I forgot. But you know that you can go in here and set up the requirements for your reporting for your property. And that's where the HUD LIHTC data collection box lives. Now, it's very important to understand checking this box does not mean that, oh, if I check this, we'll collect the HUD data. If I uncheck it, we won't. That has nothing to do with this. This is going to show another screen because if you have a LIHTC program that is active during the collection year, your tenant files are going to be pulled into that. And if you have a property or a building that is placed in service during the collection year, that's going to get pulled into our reporting, regardless of whether this box is checked or not. So important to understand what the box does and what it doesn't do. Once you click this little box, you're going to have your little HUD export item over here, and that's going to take you to a screen where you can review the HUD data collection fields. It's pretty inclusive. I wouldn't say it's 100% inclusive, but when you bring this up, you can see that, okay, all these things are populated. That's great, because that means my project file is going to be populated correctly. Let me pop over and let's look at a real world example of this. Also important to note that in order, and this is going to come up in another slide, but I'm going to say it a lot because while I was preparing for this webinar, I had a moment of panic because I could not get one of my properties to show all the data, and it was because I did not have it selected as a primary property on the associated TCA deal. And I felt pretty silly when I talked to development about that. So here on my AM characteristics, you can see that I'm going to have that selected, and it's going to take a minute to get there. And I apologize for the delay on this screen. I suspect, we might be, today is a build day. There might be a build going out somewhere. I have that selected, so that means I have this neat little HUD export item right here. So when I click on the HUD export, it's going to bring up this screen that shows all the data for this property. Now, this property was placed in service way before now, but that data is always going to show up if needed because a lot of that data will filter into other reports from HUD. And this is where I talk about you can hover over and it's going to tell you where these fields live and where they come from. So if you forget and you're like, hey, I have this one field that's not populated, I know I need it populated, where does it come from? Like here, this should tell you where your low income units come from. Because a lot of times you think if you have this data populated on your property, that it's going to populate the project data file. It doesn't. This tells you that TCA current stage main tab number of low income units is where that comes from. And we'll talk about these as well. But this, this is an informational page that's going to let you track down where the data is and verify that you do have it populated. And this is another example where I'm just kind of showing what that looks like. The total units, that's a different one. So that's going to be kind of your cheat sheet for that. And again, I brought this up because it tripped me up this year. If you have an associated TCA deal and your property HUD export page is completely blank, you need to go to your TCA deal and click on the associated portfolio property and make sure that this is selected. Because otherwise you're not going to get that data because it's not going to make that connection. So once you have that HUD box, the HUD information box checked on your AM characteristic screen, at that point is when you're going to see these little orange ribbons throughout the system that kind of give you a, hey, you need to fill this out because it's going to be part of HUD reporting. A lot of these fields aren't required to save a record because not everybody does HUD reporting, believe it or not. especially if you have a property that doesn't have tax credits for whatever reason, there would be no need for you to need to know what HUD checkboxes or what HUD information needed to be populated throughout the system. So that's another help point for knowing what fields need to be populated in the system, because you'll see these little orange ribbons next to them throughout the property. So after you have everything populated, like I said, most of you probably already have your allocation codes correct in your system. If you don't, you're going to get an error. Your system administrator will have to populate this. Again, this is something when you implement, we have that code already in there for you. But if something happens and you don't have it, if you need help determining your HUD allocation code, you can contact Mike Holler or go into the HUD portal, and there are some of the documentation will have your code for your state. You're going to know whether or not you have your HUD allocating agency code set, because if you try to do an export on the HUD Data Export page, it's going to tell you that you need that value there. So this is kind of a guardrail, foolproof system. You got to have that populated before you successfully create any of these reports or any of these files. So another thing, anybody who is running the HUD export utility in your agency is going to need the correct security privileges and be able to access the HUD export utility in the utilities panel. So if for some reason you've tasked someone to, guess what? You get to do the HUD export stuff this year and they can't get to this, it's because of security privileges probably, and you just need to update those so they can continue to do that. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be repetitive, mostly because I believe that if we just, repeat things, they're going to sink in. At least maybe that's just how I learn things. But I would suggest internally, if it's a problem for you getting the data updated and reported on a yearly basis and it gets a little cumbersome, kind of help yourself out by creating a checklist. So for a TCA deal, again, the most important thing I learned in the past 2 weeks was make sure that your property, your associated property, is the primary property, because that's going to be very important. You also want to make sure that you have BIN information, address information, and your federal minimum set aside required to populate the project file, because these need to be associated with your property, and your place and service date will come from the building. A lot of this, again, in a perfect world, if your agency is utilizing ProLink and our best practice recommendation, all the TCA deal data with the BIN addresses and information and stuff that's going to end up on the A609, that's going to be populated before you even onboard to asset management and update your property things, at which point you could use the PP data update to make sure that you're getting that BIN data, the minimum set aside data, and your address information over and your applicable fraction over to the property. If it's a 9% deal, that place and service date will transfer over to the property. The one thing that would not transfer over for a PP data update is the county. Those you would have to set separately on the building itself. And for those of you who have run into this or have issues, when you have like maybe 50 buildings and going into that and setting the county would just be really time consuming and annoying, reach out, because we have a smart docs for that would let you do it and just zip it up a lot quicker. So one of the things when we talk about the low income units, and you'll see this on that HUD export page on your portfolio property, that value is going to come from your current stage on your TCA deal, because it wants a number of low income units, which is specifically comes from the TCA deal. And then you're going to have like total units is going to come from property. Your HUD PIN and your HUD ID are populated on the edit TCA deal screen. So these are where those are going to live. And HUD pins, I believe those are created by the agency or your HUD ID, but those just need to be populated and you're good to go there. So help your future self with this information. If you are onboarding, if you know that you're onboarding a deal, before the end of the year that's going to be reported on, that's going to be placed in service for your collection year. I would suggest setting up some kind of workflow that will notify asset management that a TCA deal has moved into a stage where the 8609 might be issued. You could also create a workflow that would let you know when a bin has been created on a TCA building. So at that point, okay, you know you have bins, and that way you can go and make sure that you or whoever is in charge of updating the information on the TCA deal, you can make sure those few items that we talked about that need to be populated on the TCA deal are taken care of just right up front, and you won't have to worry about that data missing when you get to HUD reporting season. And that can generate a workflow to whoever, and it can say whatever you need it to say to just remind you, hey, we have a checklist. Please take care of this. Make sure all these items are populated so our future selves are happy when we get to HUD export season. For portfolio property, you want to make sure that you have a bin selected on the building and a place in service date or a resyndication place in service date. If this deal is suddenly, it's going to be resyndicated and it's going to be reporting on that resyndication place in service date. For portfolio property, your LIHTC program, it's only going to report on that property that was placed in service or ongoing for your tenant files if you have a LIHTC program existing on the deal. If you just have a home program and just an additional set aside of some sort, that's not going to get reported to HUD. It's just going to be LIHTC information only. Compliance review for collection year, tenant event submission status, any tenant events you have for an existing compliance review period that is part of the collection year, you have to have those tenant event submission status submitted. And the other thing is having that owner. You must have an owner on your property and they need to have contact information with a phone number. Another thing I want to mention, because I know this came out of the HUD presentation at NCSHA in Atlanta last month, make sure that your building, when you're creating your buildings, has the correct state of your agency. I know sometimes that we accidentally scroll and don't save things correctly, but we trust that whoever's entering the data understands what state it needs to be in. But you can create a data view and just have like a really quick checklist process for your HUD data every year, saying, okay, so let's look at all our buildings and make sure that they're all in the correct state. It's like, hey, data view, show me a list of properties that aren't in the state of like Colorado. Let's say Chaff is doing it. Show me a building that's not in the state of Colorado. That makes you, it's going to eliminate the fact that you may have the wrong state on a building. But for the owner, you'll have to make sure that the owner information is updated on the entity owner contact information stuff. So occasionally when you get your files generated and you upload them to HUD, it will give you an error that says something about owner information, and this is what it's talking about. We will go a little more in depth talking about some of those errors and where that data is as we go through this training. All right, so we are going to have a quick pop quiz. I'm looking over here at my chat. So if you are participating in this, when we ask these questions, go ahead and just throw your answer in the chat. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to check it because we're not going to, call people out and call on you to make you answer. So first of all, what determines the agency's HUD allocating agency code? The agency does its own thing. We, ProLink, our software assigns the code, HUD assigns the code, or none of the above. And that is correct. The answer is C, HUD assigns the code for everybody who chimed in. So true or false, the HUD export utility is located in the admin panel in ProLinkHFA. I apologize for not having Jeopardy music prepared for today's webinar. But we're not going to spend that much time on these because I know that all of you know it. That is correct. That is false. It's in the utilities panel. That was kind of a trick question. It was kind of mean. But yeah, anybody who's been in ProLink for any length of time understands that we have a utilities panel. It's a little different from the admin panel. Okay, so let's talk about finding HUD data and ProLink HFA. We kind of briefly went over it. Again, redundancy is key. I am going to repeat a lot of things, but that's okay. So let's talk about the files. One of the first files you're going to see, and let me bring up my application. We'll go back over here to the utilities panel and pop into our HUD export utility. So these are the different files that come out of here, right? So we were going to talk about the tenant XML validation file. Here's an example where all the files have been generated, and then the HUD LIHTC data XML validation file shows up. So what's that going to do, you may ask? That's going to show you potential upload errors from tenant event data. Some things may be existing if you haven't finalized some things. The file is going to show the property name and the specific bin and unit, then the data that would cause error on HUD upload. A lot of these errors can be resolved during compliance evaluations. Now, some of these validations we don't check for. So like in this example where one of these has like total annual household income is like $888,000. If that was a recertification, we probably didn't check and make sure, but there's a limit that can for that HUD wants, this to be under a certain amount. Tenant paid rent. In this example here on this particular property, the value is a negative. You can't put in negatives for rent. Apparently, that's just not allowed. Another item you might see is your bin element is invalid. Our bin has a certain structure. It's got 2 letters, and then it has what, 7 digits in it, and those may have hyphens, they may not have hyphens, but if you're not meeting that requirement, it's going to let you know that the bin is invalid. And then here's another example. Gross rent is over $5,000. So we don't have an internal check for that, but this is going to just point out, hey, this could be a problem. Even though you went through and evaluated this, you need to reach out to your owner agent to make sure this wasn't an accident. Maybe that was supposed to be $512.50. So then you can take care of that and regenerate your file, and these errors will go away. So you'll know that your tenant data is going to be all inclusive with correct data. The missing data file shows a little bit of things from the tenant file, but also from, your property file if you want to do some things. The biggest one we see is that tenant events have not been submitted for the compliance review for the collection year. So that may mean that you've brought in items and you've evaluated, they've done the XML import, but you haven't finalized it. And for whatever reason, the tenant event submission status is not in submitted. So these are things you just pop in, set it to submitted, save the compliance review record for the collection year, and you are good to go. It's also going to have issues like, okay, we don't have a place in service date, but you have tenant events. You don't have a county on your building. And then you also have like, if you've run your compliance review and you still have missing requirements, first of all, you haven't been able to close that out for the collection year. And second of all, you're obviously going to have to reconcile those issues in order to get a successful evaluation and look at any compliance exceptions you may get in order to resolve those and finalize your compliance year. So compliance review having missing requirements. Hopefully by the time you do your collection year, I mean, we're in what, July of 2024. My wish for you is that all of your compliance reviews are finalized successfully and you won't have to see this. I'll cross everything that's the case, but I know that it doesn't always go that way just because there's so much data that you need to keep track of. This, when we talk about the tenant event submission status being pending, I know that we have like our compliance review status is one thing. Like up here, you see it says compliance review status. That is a totally separate animal from your tenant event submission status. And that's here. Now, when your owner agents import the XMLs and they go through their data validation process and then they submit them, that will change to submitted. So in most cases, you're not going to have to mess with it. But if you've set it back to pending and they've had to make, your owner agents have made manual updates to their events, that's a situation where you might have forgotten to set this back to submitted. or they did, or it's in some kind of purgatory or flux, and then you might have to set that back. But it will just tell you, hey, here's the property name, and here's the HFA number, and then you can go in and take care of that as part of your HUD export data cleanup process. So for your project XML file, I've got a few snippets of what this looks like. And I know that for many people, it's like, hey, this is XML. This means nothing to me. I know many of you know enough to be dangerous, and that kind of makes sense. And I kind of color coded this for our training. And this is, similar from last year. The green is going to be like, okay, this is data that comes from the property. And the yellow is this is data that comes from the TCA deal. And so I kind of put this down here just so you would know, because someone asked me the other day when we were going through this what the colors meant. And I was like, well, I should probably tell people that, huh? So here you can see when we talk about TCA deals, and one of the things that come in is the HUD pin. And this is where it comes from. It comes from your edit TCA deal. And we talked about that previously, right? I just created a data view that brings up some of this data. So I could just bring up that data view and make sure that all that data is populated before I go on and start creating my files. Then we have the HUD export property data view that I created when we talk about the project address, that this is where all that's coming from. And you can, again, can create a data view to make sure everything is populated before you start submitting. Also TCA buildings, if we need to make sure that we have the BEN and the address, the city, the zip. You would be surprised at how many times the zip gets left off. So all that information needs to be there. And again, just having like a data view that you set up to check all this stuff before you start doing your reporting can save you a lot of time. So when we talk about edit property, I assume that everybody understands where all this data is, but I went ahead and threw some screenshots in here again to make sure. So for edit property, on your selected property, on edit property here, this is where that information is going to live. On your edit TCA deal, here we have our HUD pen and the HUD ID over here. Edit TCA building, address information, state and zip, your BEN, minimum set aside. Again, if it's a 9% construction deal and you do your PP data update, this is the place and service date that will populate the building with that BEN. Just a side note there. So for our next file, here's some other fields that we talk about when we say the owner information. This trips up more people every year, and we all know it, but sometimes it just doesn't get updated, and you have to go back and do that. So it's going to be an entity on the property, your owner. And so it says here, like, this will be your owner's name. This will be the address of the actual owner, but you're also going to need the contact information. So there has to be a contact with a first name and a last name associated to that owner to populate this data on the project XML file. Oh, and then let's see, I think that takes care of that, but it needs to be the owner direct phone, and pretty much all this pulls in is the contact information. Your property owner info shows up on list property entities, and if for whatever reason you don't have a contact here, and this is one of those missing data things that pop up or you get an error, then you would go to the property and you would go to the ownership structure tab on your list property entities, click in here. And once you click into that little, into the row where the owner entity name is, it's going to take you to the actual edit entity record for that entity. And at that point, you can add, the direct phone information, the mailing address information, and then you can go add a contact if you need to, and it doesn't have one on the associations tab. So that will fulfill that requirement. So other things that might get reported on, and where they come from. If you have like amount issued from an assigned cycle, that value gets pulled from the multi-year tracking tab on your TCA deal. Number of low income units, we talked about this earlier in the webinar, but that would come from number of low income units that is on the current stage of our TCA deal. It doesn't care about the total units, but it cares about the number of low income units. So the other pieces, parts of the file, building, place, and service date. This is going to be on the property building. And so you can create a data view that shows the place and service dates. And this example, this project file is from last year. I was collecting data for the 2022 year. And this is where that information came from. And it populates the year it was placed in service. Oh, let me go back. And I'm trying to see if there's anything here I want to talk about that needs to be populated. Here are some optional things. It doesn't require it, but if you do have this information populated on your property, this is where that data is going to come from the project XML file. You have your population data on your edit portfolio property, and that's where some of these values would come from. General, disabled, elderly, and homeless. And then if you have any enhancements selected on your edit portfolio property, on the federal enhancements or on the enhancements tab, it's going to populate those. That's where those values come from for the project file. So let's talk quickly about the no longer monitored file. I'm guessing this is everybody's favorite because that means you have less work to do. I don't know. But any property that has a LIHTC compliance program where the end date is the collection year is going to show up in your no longer monitored file. And so if you have, you can bring up a data view that shows you which ones should be generated that you can expect to see. So then we talk about the tenant zip file, tenant zip file data. Woo, that was a lot. Hang on a second. I need a sip of water here. So the tenant zip file is going to have a bunch of XML files, depending how big your portfolio is. And some states only have like 2 or 3 files. Some states have like 20 files. Every single file needs to be uploaded individually. So once you download your tenant data file, you would export it to like a folder somewhere on your desktop or your computer, and then you would upload those files one at a time in the HUD portal. And this is what the raw data from the tenant file looks like. It has, like, you can see that it has information like tenant number. That's something from the database. I don't know, but it gives you like the effective date. It gives you the pen, the bin, and then we get into the unit number and the size and the household relationships and things of that nature. I may bring this up again later, but is vacant too means it's not vacant. It means somebody lives in there. If it is vacant, that will show up as a 1, and those get reported as well. All right, so before we dive deeper into some of these, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break. So go refresh your coffee and we will be back shortly. Okay, everybody. My timer on my Fitbit lets me know it's time for us to get back to business. So hopefully you were able to refresh your coffee, or your water, or have a quick snack. So let's get through the rest of this. Creating your HUD data export. So we've kind of gone through setting up as much data as you can, making sure your data is correct before you get to this step so you don't have to wash, rinse, repeat. And making sure all the data that you need in your file is there. So let's talk about the HUD data export screen. Most of you have used this before. If you haven't, like everything else in ProLinkHFA, when you see a red asterisk, you know that field is required. We do have people who's like, respect the red dot. Well, it's an asterisk, but you know what I mean. Anytime you see a red field, you're like, I should probably populate this in order to do anything with this particular functionality. And then your data collection year is obviously required. Everybody will be doing 2023 this year, I assume. And then, you know, your screen is going to show you all your previous exports here and your current exports. I like to explain that you can run the export as many times as necessary because I've had people ask me, well, is that going to do something? Are we going to be submitting all these extra files to HUD? No, this just generates the data. You can run this as many times as you need as you resolve errors and you go through your tenant XML validation spreadsheet and your missing data file to make sure everything is correct. It's okay to run it. It's just pulling data. It's basically a data dump for you to look at and review before you submit the actual data to HUD. It's going to give you your status, your data collection year, the date, who did it, your log message, and then all your files are going to live over here. Now you can work on them one by one, or you can do them all at once. And you have the option to select all, which means it's going to generate project no longer monitored in tenants file, and the data collection year. Now, regardless of what you pick, if there is any data missing, you're going to get the tenant XML or missing data file. You don't get to the option of choosing those. Those are just going to happen if there's data that needs to be populated. So notifications, when we talk about like you have these different statuses on here, pending is once you click export, the history row is created and it's waiting for all those files to generate and then show up for you to access them. When it's completed, that means, okay, the items that you have chosen to export are done and you can take a look at them now. If it's completed with errors, you're going to see an error over here in the, let me bring this up so we can have a visual. If there's any errors, it will show you here. And you can download a log to bring that up to see what that's going to look like. And of course, it brought it up on my other screen. Whoops. And sometimes there may not be any errors because like here it's completed, but if you go down here, that was a bad example. I apologize for that. Let me find one that's been completed with errors because I know that my test data is not perfect. And in previous examples, I have probably generated some errors. I am disappointed that I have not generated any errors. Well, just be like me and have perfect data and you won't get any error logs. There's that. Oh, there's one. See, that wasn't me though. Sometimes the logs, the errors are easy to understand. Sometimes they're not. It just depends. Well, that's the only one, and it doesn't have any really good data for us to see. Some of it will be like when you see your log message here, it only shows you a certain amount. If there's a lot more data in that log that indicates there were some errors, like previously we had a resyndication error that we resolved, and it's that would show up in the log file as well. If you do have any questions about how to decipher that log file when you do get completed with errors, reach out to us, enter supports ticket, let us know, and we can clarify that for you. Canceled. Anytime user can select a row and click canceled. So you can cancel it while it's pending. If you just want to keep, if you want to differentiate, like if you have to do, I don't know, 4 or 5 exports to get the right data, and your most recent export is completed and everything is good, you might want to cancel all the other ones, set those to cancel for the reporting year, just so it's clear which one was successful and which one you actually did use to submit your data to HUD. So you don't get confused with all this previous data. You just want everything in one completed row for the year. Now, we currently have an issue with the email generating once the user has completed the export. You would get an email saying, hey, it's done. So that's not working right now. So what I do is after I've, done my export, and I'll just do, we'll go ahead and do all. When I create the export, let me go back to my first row. That would be helpful as well. I would like to go to 1, please. Thank you. Okay. It's going to show as pending. And so since we're not having that email sent out, you don't want to refresh the screen, because if you refresh the screen, it's going to generate that again because you have all in this selected. So what I do is I just kind of every couple of minutes, I just click on the HUD export utility item in the menu, and that's going to refresh. And as you can see, I have too much missing data to generate my tenant zip file, but that's how I know that it's done. So it's kind of a little manual step until we get that fixed, which will be shortly, but that is just how you would keep an eye on that. Now, your project data file and your project's no longer monitored file might be empty. It will generate, but it can be empty if you did not place any buildings in service during the collection year, or if you have you don't have any compliance program LIHTC end dates that have been reached, and that's okay. And if you, I believe the understanding is if your project no longer monitored file is blank, there's no need to upload a blank file through the HUD portal because there's nothing to report. So now we have our pop quiz on how we create the export. So my first question is going to be, and you can throw your answers in the chat here, which fields or what fields are required to run the HUD export utility? So we have just file type, B is data collection year, C is file type and data collection year, and D is file type or data collection year. And I'm seeing people playing along at home. Answer is definitely C. You have to have the file type and data collection year, which we know because of the red asterisk that is next to those fields on the create export. All right, so next question is true or false? The HUD export history grid includes a link to a log file that includes the details about the export process. True or false? We have an answer. And that is true. It's going to give you details about the export process and everything that was completed or not completed. All right, so last question on our pop quiz here. What happens when you run the utility? A, the export files are downloaded automatically to your computer. B, a link to the export file is included in the HUD export history grid. C, the export files are transferred to HUD. Or D, all of the above. And the answer is B. You get the link to the export file. No, the files are not automatically downloaded to your computer, and you are not automatically transporting the export files to HUD by running the HUD export utility. All right, so now the fun part that everybody loves, getting errors and how to resolve those. So let's do a quick deep dive on this one. This is a visual explainer of what the files do, and so everyone is clear on what goes to HUD and what doesn't. The tenant XML validation file, just for your information, to help you get your data all together and update what might be missing from your tenant events for the year. Your missing data file, again, informational only. That's just to help you get your data in order, get your ducks in a row to submit it to HUD. The project XML file, the no longer monitored file, and the tenant zip file. This will all contain information that gets uploaded to HUD. And again, with the tenant zip file, you have to extract all those individual files and upload them individually. Unless something has changed in the past month or so that I don't know about, which is possible, but I suspect somebody would have told me about that. There would have been a HUD email or something of that nature. So those have to be extracted and uploaded individually. The screen with the info is very small. Heather, the screen with the info is very small and can't be read. Can it be expanded or put on the main screen? I'm not sure. This is a question we just had pop up in the chat. I am.
Yeah, Sarah, I think I just fixed it. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Because Heather, it's really big right here when I'm looking at it. Okay, so hopefully perfect. Okay, excellent. Sorry about that, y'all. I don't know if I should blame my computer, but I want a new computer, so I'm totally going to blame my computer. And now I have like witnesses, so that's great. All right, so next, HUD export files. So this is the tenant XML data validation file, and it's going to show you properties and units that might generate errors when you do upload to HUD if you don't fix them prior to submission. Again, in a perfect world, a lot of this stuff is going to be resolved when you're evaluating your compliance reviews and you're going through the process of reconciling any exceptions you have and finalizing that. Now, this changed in 2023. There was like a $4,000 limit. Prior to 2023, there was the $4,000 limit for tenant paid rent. Now it's been increased to $5,000. So if you have any tenant paid rent field on your tenant event that exceeds $5,000, you're going to get an error there. And you can see on the screen, I've made some notes for these, like negative values for rent are not valid. You can put a 0, but you cannot put negatives in there. Values of over $5,000 are not valid for gross rent or tenant paid rent. Also for your federal or your non-federal rental assistance and probably federal rental assistance, it can't be more than $5,000. If you get like a social security number, it should be the last four of the social in those files should be 4 digits or it should be blank. And even if those 4 digits are 0000, because I know different agencies have different requirements on actually reporting the last four, or it just doesn't matter. We just need some kind of value in there. And then values over $500,000 are not valid for total annual income. So if you have um, a tenant that for some reason is making that, it's going to bring this up because again, there's a good chance that somebody might have like put that in incorrectly. And then I would hope that this would be caught by our compliance engine. This is just like your second guardrail. Going through your yearly process to make sure that all the data is correct and valid for your tenant events. So again, the tenant XML data validation file is just giving you an opportunity to fix things that may have, for whatever reason, been missed if you haven't evaluated or something like that, and you haven't finalized your compliance review for the year and all the events that it entails. This is an example, like on this particular tenant event, the tenant paid rent is $5,000, is over $5,000. So that's what's going to generate the error. And then if possible, like the total household income is over $500,000, it would generate an error in the XML validation file and kind of encourage you to go, look into that and make sure that's okay. Just to give you a heads up, you're like, this could be wrong. Someone must have put this value in incorrectly. So our missing data file, this covers your tenant event stuff and your property stuff. So if you have a place and service date on a building and your compliance, LIHTC compliance program is active, it's going to be like, hey, you got to put that on there. Again, we talked about the pending tenant event submission status on the compliance review year. That's going to trip you up and it's going to tell you that you haven't submitted these. You may have them in there, you may have evaluated, but you can't finalize it until they're submitted. So hopefully you won't get any of that because again, the dream is to have all the 2023 data finalized and off your plate before you get to this point. Again, I know it's a dream, but dreams are good. We all have them. There's no problem. I cross my fingers for all of you. The edit compliance review screen shows missing requirements that have not been resolved. With all the data that you go through and all the things that you have to keep track of, is it possible you missed one? Yes, and that's okay because this is going to let you know, hey, you have a compliance review that needs your attention, so you can finalize that and go about your day. If you don't have a county, the county's not been set on a building, you would have gotten that error when you tried to evaluate and it couldn't find any rent limits because you didn't have the county on the building. So this, again, just kind of highlights some pieces, parts you may have missed during the year before finishing all your 2023 compliance items that you need to get done. Many of these would cause validation errors. So again, they should be resolved, but just in case you've missed something, these will show up. If these are showing up and you are 99.9% sure that all your data is correct, reach out, put in a support ticket, and we will help you find out what is going on and why this is happening and get you back on the road to getting this data in there. So the project data file, project XML data file is primarily based on for properties where the place and service date on the property building falls within the year entered in the data collection year. And it has a LIHTC program on it. And I think I said this in the beginning. The HUD export is only our HUD exports only cares about the LIHTC programs. Anything that has a LIHTC program defined on and is active, we are going to pull that data into the project XML file if a building was placed in service within that year, or there might have been a resyndication date of the collection year. But for your home programs or additional set aside, if you have those are the only programs that live on your property and they're not tax credit per se, then these aren't going to be part of your HUD reporting at all. And none of those will show up in our project XML file. And you can see here where we have the pen, project name, and information like that we talked about in one of the previous slides. HUD export files and I apologize, no longer monitored XML file. Again, this shows all the properties where the compliance end date is in the data collection year. So these particular ones, I set up data in our test environment to see how many would pull. And these got pulled in because all of their compliance programs end in 2023. So I created a little data view on the compliance program data view just to make sure that, okay, 2023, I did a advanced filter, making sure that the compliance end date was between 1/1/2023 and 12/31/2023 to make sure that all my data got pulled back. And I could just do a double check. It's like, yes, these are no longer monitored, and my data in the system confirms that these are no longer monitored. So again, another example how you can use data views to make sure your data is correct before you submit it to HUD. The tenant zip file, again, contains multiple files because there's so much data and they're so big. And here's an example of some that got pulled out, and there's like what, 9 files in here, and they're pretty big. Even when they're compressed, they're pretty large. So once these get exported, this is kind of what it looks like. It'll have like your property name, it'll have tenant data, dates of birth, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so we're going to have a quick pop quiz to understand what file type matches the definition of the file, which I'm pretty sure you all know, but let's just play along at home. Your missing data file, what is that? Does it show missing or incorrect data from tenant events? Which one of these does the, please share your, oh, okay, that's Sam, sorry, yeah. So what does one match up to when you look at these definitions, the missing data file? The answer is D. It shows the properties that have issues, such as when the compliance review hasn't been evaluated. So the project XML file, what does that show? I'll take this along with you because you think I would know this because I wrote these, but let's be sure that the trainer knows what she's talking about. The project XML file is going to be B. Yay. Awesome. All right. So the no longer monitored XML file, missing or incorrect data, tenant events captured for the data collection year, or shows all properties where the compliance program is LIHTC and the compliance end date is in the data collection year. No longer monitored file is going to be E. Your tenant zip file shows all tenant events that have been captured for the data collection year or missing or incorrect data from tenant events. That answer is going to be C. And then the tenant XML validation file is going to show missing or incorrect data from your tenant events. There we go. So if you are wondering what the data in HUD looks like for your projects no longer monitored and you need a HUD ID or something like that, you can get it from this link, the LIHTC HUD user database. That is open. I believe, I don't even think you have to be registered with the portal to get that information. So this is a place for you to go out and find it. And if you have any problems, finding out where the HUD data you're looking for, like the reports or something like that, let me know. I can help you out. We do have access to the HUD portal, so we can assist you during your HUD export season, for lack of a better word, and help you reconcile data for our agency's states. And so I'm always happy to help if you need assistance tracking down some of this data. Whoops. So HUD export files, HUD ID and HUD PIN and ProLink. Again, we talked about this, but I do not mind repeating myself at all. They're located on the TCA deal. HUD ID is the database and the link on the previous slide that I just showed you, and the HUD PIN is a number given to the property by your agency. So those HUD IDs are internal. Sometimes they are BENs. I've seen some agencies use BENs. It just depends on what how you want to keep track of those HUD IDs in your system. So here are some example errors of what might happen when you have all your HUD export files ready to go and you are starting to upload those into the HUD portal, and then you get an error and it's like, oh my gosh, what is this? Because they're not super helpful. because they are just straight data errors. And so this one, I can figure this out just because I spent a lot of time with a lot of you trying to figure them out for a few years. And so it says value 2025 is not facet valid, blah, blah, blah. I know it doesn't make sense, but this tells me you have somewhere you have a rent value that is over $5,000. Now, it's going to tell you like this is the file, and it's going to tell you what line number in the file that is happening at. So what you can do if you're comfortable doing it is you can open, okay, so let's see, LITAG tenant 2, open that file, and then you can kind of look down. Let me bring up a file as an example real quick. See if I can find one. Bear with me for just a second, because I feel like this is relatively easy. And I want to show you that you too can do this. Give me a file, guys. All right. This one doesn't want to, well, that's great. That one doesn't want to, well, I may not be able to open the one that I wanted to open, but that's okay. Oh, here's one. Whoops. Didn't like that one. All right, I'm just going to show you a completely different XML file. I'm just trying to give the idea of how you can look at this in XML. When you look in here at line number, these are the line numbers over here on the left. This is an actual XML file for tenant events. It's not the project data file, but in XML, you can just scroll down here and you can see these line numbers. So if this was this file, I could go to line number 56300. Now you don't have to scroll until you get to that number. What you can do is do a search and a go to, and then you would type in that line number. And once you got in there, you could figure out which unit it was talking about, because chances are this, with some of the additions we've made to our tenant XML validation files and the missing data file, this is going to show up and you're going to have this resolved before you even upload this data to HUD. So, and our XML validation and missing data file is going to give you a lot more information for you to go out and find out where this is happening and when you need to fix it. So the hope is you're not going to get any of these errors anymore if you have resolved all the information in that tenant XML file, validation file, or the missing data file. But if you do get to this point, please reach out to me and I will help you find out what needs to be fixed, and we will handle it together. I will not leave you alone and have to do that by yourself. So again, when you upload them, other errors might appear in your project file. There's different things like I said, if you need assistance finding that field, do your support ticket to us. We'll be happy to help. The documentation that kind of spells this stuff out. And again, if you're not comfortable with XML or you're not a fan of XML, it may be Greek to you, but this is going to give you a lot of information about what these fields correlate to just from how from, I don't know, just a data level. But I can go through and help figure out where these are if you need me to. Like some of these are kind of explanatory. You can kind of deduce what it means. For this particular one, there's no bin or bin address that's missing in the XML. Another one is a phone number may be wrong. A phone number may not be populated. The phone numbers on the owner contact trip up people a lot. Again, that's what we talk about when you're, going through this process before you even start your HUD data collection or reporting, going through these files and creating these data views to make sure you already have that data so you don't get stuck here. That would save you a lot of time and you won't have to deal with a lot of errors like this. But again, if you need assistance, let us know. We're happy to help. So I think that is all we have today. I've wrapped up just a little early. We have time for Q&A if anybody has any questions that they want to ask. And Andrea, if there's anybody who has had questions that we need to talk about, let me know. No question is too big or too small, and there are no stupid questions.
I don't have any questions at the moment, but maybe people are typing.
Which data view lets us see the HUD LITEC data collection field is what Lenore is asking. That's a good question. I don't think we have a data view for that, Lenore, and I'm going to go find out if I am lying to you. So hang on just a second. We'll follow up. I think Sam, I'm pretty sure that when we reply or we send out the information to the recording, we can find out, we can answer that question if there's a data view for how to export. And if there's not, I might select it. I want to be 100% sure.
Yes, we can
Does
follow
the,
up.
pardon?
Yes, we can follow up with answers.
Okay. Mm. Does the portfolio property building address have to be equal to the TCA building address? No, it doesn't. It would be great if it was, because the idea again is that, once you populate all your buildings on the edit TCA deal before you onboard a property, if you use the portfolio property data update, that address information is going to follow from the TCA deal to the property. But I do not think there is a requirement that it has to be correct. Although if it's incorrect, HUD might let you know that the data is incorrect. I'm not sure, from the conversations I had earlier, a couple of weeks ago with some of our agencies and the HUD data that gets reported. Some of you don't even look at it. And when I talk about the HUD data being reported, I'm talking about the tenants and LITEC units report, which I think is some of the data that comes out of as far as reporting place and service stuff and active units, active properties, and things of that nature. But I don't know what that report will reflect or what the whoops. I'm not done. I'm not done. We're still talking. I have a roller ball and it's very sensitive apparently. But yeah, so that answer, Lenore, is no. Any other questions from anybody?
Yes, Sarah, there is one from Susan in the Q&A. Do you have access to that?
Of course not. I'm sure I do. I just don't know where it's at. Hang on a second. Oh, I found it. Oh, tooltips. Yes, follow the info. Okay, there's Sparks. Hi Susan. It's good to see you. Following the info. You know what, Susan, reach out to me and email me. Let's set up some time to figure out what's going on. And you're not gonna like this. It could be a you thing, but we will figure that out and we will walk it. Susan and I have done this before. We have spent time um fighting with the HUD export to make sure the data is coming from the right place. So we will, you can also reach out and we can do that. It's just part of what we do as customer support. If you need us, we're here to walk through it and hang out on a Teams meeting and fix all this. So any other questions? I think that may be it. Well, I am happy to give you back 15 minutes of your day if there's nothing else. And Sam, I think the only thing we want to talk about is our next webinar in August is going to be about 8823s. Just to give you a heads up. If there's anything specific to 8823s you would like to see us talk about, email me and let me know because, oh, look, it's the end of our presentation. And now you have my email address if you didn't already. Go ahead and send me an email and let me know if there's anything you would like me to add to our 8823 discussions, hot tips or something you've noticed that is weird that you don't like, or some things that are trip people up that we need to cover. I would be happy to add that to our offering if you need me to. And Sam has put the registration in the chat. So that is all I have. Sam, anything else or should I just call it?
Nope, I think we're good, Sarah.
Thank you all for joining us. And again, Sam will follow up with an answer to Lenore's question that we didn't answer, as well as a link to our recording. Have a fantastic rest of your day and week, and I hope that we will all see you in August for our 8823 webinar. Take care.